Welcome to the Real View podcast, where Ohio Realtors connect you to innovators and influencers, keeping you with the real view of real estate. Whether you're a broker, agent, first-time homebuyer, industry leader, or just happen to stumble upon our podcast today, you can expect to hear tips, tools, tricks, interesting information, and so much more from the experts in Ohio's real estate game. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Real View podcast. I am your host, Allison Wiley. Joining me today, our special guest is Nikki Buckelew, PhD. She is an author, speaker, coach, and educator, and the co-founder and CEO of Seniors Real Estate Institute, a coaching and training organization dedicated to equipping real estate agents to better serve the 55-plus mature market. A 30-year veteran real estate agent, she holds a BA in gerontology, an MS in counseling psychology, and a doctorate in psychology. She is the author of Senior-Centered Real Estate, My Path to Purpose, and I'm so excited to welcome her on today. Welcome to the show, Nikki.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And Nikki and I were just chatting before we started recording about today's topic, and I'm super excited to be hearing a little bit more about Nikki, what she's been able to accomplish in her career, and how any of our members and our listeners out there can take kind of what she's done and apply it to their business to help grow and get stronger. But before we get started on today's topic, Nikki, I'd like to hear a little bit more about you. Could you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in real estate?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a 30-year veteran. It feels strange to say that, but I did start when I was 21 years old, right at the very beginning of my young adulthood. And somebody told me that I could go become a realtor and not have to go to college. And I thought that sounded like a really great deal to me at the time. So I got my real estate license, bought my first house, then got my real estate license, and then, didn't start specializing until later. But it's interesting, that was 1991. And so in 1991, the way you built your business was very different than the way you build it now. And so I've learned a lot over those 30 years. But truthfully, here's the answer to your question. I was in the car with my realtor and my mother-in-law in the back seat. We've looked at it. This was in 91, and in Oklahoma in 91, the housing market was rebounding after a major, the oil crash, the banks and everything. There was lots and lots of repos and lots of assumptions. And we looked at, hundreds of houses, made multiple offers, couldn't get an offer accepted. And we finally got the house that we wanted. It was the perfect house. And I remember my mother-in-law saying, Nikki, you should become a realtor. You would be good at this. And then my realtor saying, yeah, you would really enjoy this. And I was like, okay. And I didn't have to go to college. That was bonus. So that was the beginning. Long time ago.
I love that. I love hearing the origin stories. It helps kind of explain, a little bit more about you and your perspective and how you got into the industry. And I know we mentioned as I was doing, the introductions that you serve, a very specific clientele and a very specific niche, which we're going to get more into here in a minute. But talk to us a little bit about that, what your focus, what your specialization is in. And tell us about that and how you were able to kind of focus in on one specific area.
Sure. So when I first started, I didn't know anything about specialization. And so I did everything that I could think of to try to generate business. And that from door knocking to open houses to expireds to cold calling, you name it, right? I did it all. And I went back to college. I did go to college and decide to get my degree, which was interesting. I firmly believe that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And went back to school and got a gerontology degree. And then I got a counseling degree thinking I was going to become a therapist. My husband continued to run our real estate business. And when I became a therapist, I started working with people in a long-term care community. So a nursing home is what some people would refer to that as. And it was so disheartening to me because the people had moved there and they just they had a lot of transition, anxiety, and depression because their home had been sold. Many of them had lived in that home for 5 decades. The home was sold. Family did the best they could, I'm sure. But there was a lot of emotions around that. And I just realized one day, and I told my husband, I came back to the office and I said, I don't want to be a therapist. I'm coming back into real estate with you. And we're going to focus on helping seniors. And he thought I had lost my mind. Maybe I had lost my mind, but we did. We started that year focusing on the older adult market, built our business around that, and kind of the rest is history. That's what we've been doing ever since.
And you've had really great success with that. And I think, there's so much to get into about, how you found that, how others can find that. Why do you think, in today's real estate climate, and we were also talking, a minute ago before we started recording about, everything that the real estate market has gone through this year, the practice changes, through the settlement that NAR entered into. In your opinion, why is it so important today with everything going on, what we've just kind of gotten through with practice changes and industry updates? Why is it so important in today's real estate climate to really make sure that we are playing that role of an expert?
Well, there's a variety of reasons, I think. One is that you can't be all things to all people, first of all. As much as I would love to be able to be an expert in all things real estate, it's impossible. Even in my own market, which has grown exponentially since I first started in real estate, we were just the other day driving from downtown Oklahoma City in what we call Bricktown. And instead of coming like up the main roads the way we always would, we kind of wove around and kind of did a little bit of a sightseeing tour on our way back home. And my husband and I were amazed at how many developments were being built, how many older areas had been renovated. There were just so many changes. And I said, there is no way we could keep up with all of this. No way. You have the internet, you add all the technology changes, and the consumer is much more informed and knowledgeable than they used to be. I think another really important point in this is that consumers, even though they have all this information, right, they can get all the information off the internet just like we can. We are no longer the keepers of the data, right? They have access to the same data for the most part that we do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to use that data or how to assimilate that data or make sense of the data. And I can't make sense of data that I'm not familiar with either. So, for instance, let's say that neighborhood I drove through earlier this week, older historic homes. That is not my specialty. I would have a really hard time being an expert trying to price homes in that particular neighborhood because I am not up on that particular part of the market. I would want to collaborate with an agent who had that expertise, right? Now, if I'm a home seller, who am I going to list my house with? I want to list my house with somebody who knows that market. So I think as real estate agents, we can generalize and try to be all things to all people. And I think at some point we're going to lose maybe listings because of that, potentially. We're probably not serving our buyers at the highest level if we don't know a specific area or a specific type of property that they're interested in. And so expertise is part of it. But then there's the pay structure too. And Allison, this is something that isn't talked about a lot. And, I'm not going to talk about specific commissions or anything like that. But I'm going to tell you, as an expert in what I do, I command a little higher rate than somebody who doesn't know anything about something. Just like an attorney, financial planner, anybody like that, you're gonna make more money, and when you're an expert, people are willing to pay you for that expertise. And I think realtors have an opportunity there too.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, thinking about having to communicate our value, having to have these conversations, on a more regular basis with clients to explain, hey, here's, my services and here's the fee that I associate with those services. I think this is a great way, as you mentioned, to help justify why somebody should choose to work with you.
Let me give you a really specific story. And this happened years ago, but it's happened multiple times since then. But it really hammers home like that point. This was when we were doing broker tours as an office. We would all get together and carpool together, and we would go look at all the new listings in a geographic area. And we do quadrants. 1 week we'd do this area, and then the next week another area. We're in the car with a colleague of ours who we were good friends with. He was a competitor agent, but he was in our office. We're all riding together. We're going down a street. And the driver says, oh, I'm getting ready to list a house in this neighborhood. And we said, great. And he said, in fact, I think it's on this street. Now we were going to look at our listing. We get further down the street and he goes, well, maybe not. The house he thought he was going to list is the house we had just listed.
Mm.
And he said, how in the world did you guys get this listing? Because we were kind of shocked too. We're like, what happened? How did that happen? He said, how did you get that listing? And we told him it was a referral from a senior living community. And the senior living community, we did a lot of moves there. We helped a lot of clients move in and out of that community. They recommended us to the daughter. The daughter called us and we met with her and her mom and listed the house. His name was never mentioned, not one time. And unfortunately, here's the reality. This agent was a strong agent. Actually, his production levels were higher than ours. He did more business than we did. But we knew how to help this woman downsize her house, get rid of the things that she wasn't going to move, get moved to this community. We knew the community and the people there. So we had a different level of rapport with them based on our expertise. He was amazed. Now, thankfully, we were friends, so this didn't create a rift. But most agents, when that happens, we get a phone call that says, that was supposed to be my listing and you took it. And my response is, we didn't take anything. We just went out and presented our value proposition. They made a selection based on us being experts in downsizing. And I'm going to tell you, normal, typical agents can't compete with that except for if they do one thing. They have to reduce their commission if they're going to win that listing from us. We don't do that. But if an agent wants that listing, 99% of the time we're competing on price, not value. So that's a good example.
No, that's a great point and a great example, as you said, on why that matters and how it can really enhance, you and what you do. And I think oftentimes, agents will just be the jack of all trades and say, well, I just do it all. I'm going to do whatever I can. But really, that could actually hinder you being able to channel that energy and that focus into one area that you're really, really good at and that you are becoming that expert and that people are recognizing you're getting referrals from. It sounds like that's kind of, a great route to go in when you think about, how you want to tailor you and your business. This episode of The Real View is brought to you by the Ohio Association of Community Colleges. Ohio's network of community colleges provides accessible training that accommodates the busy lifestyles of aspiring real estate professionals at half the price of a traditional university. With convenient locations in every part of the state, as well as online options, Ohio's community colleges are your smart choice for pre-licensing education. For more details or to start the journey to a real estate career, visit the education page at ohiorealtors.org and then click on the pre-license course locations. Do you have any suggestions on how you can find the right niche? And I know, you had prior experience working with seniors and before you were getting super involved in real estate again, you had been kind of working in that arena, so you were probably familiar with it. But what advice would you have for agents to find the right niche for them, to find where they really excel at? How do we make sure that we are choosing what's right for us?
That is really the key, right? Working with older adults is not everybody's cup of tea, right? That is not everybody's favorite thing. Happens to be mine, but I think that first and foremost, if you've been in the business a while, you tend to gravitate toward a certain type of either property, a certain area of town, possibly, or a certain type of client, right? And so for us, it was more demographic than it was geographic. But I would say first look at what does your current business look like? Who do you get really excited about serving? What properties do you get really excited about going and looking at? That's the first thing. If it makes sense, like, I love waterfront property, like oceanfront, but here in Oklahoma, we don't have a lot of that. So I had to forego that specialty in Oklahoma City, right? So if you don't have a lot of those properties, it doesn't make sense. So that's the first thing after you've kind of decided what you love. Does it make sense? Then I would say, what is your level of knowledge about that particular property or client? And if you don't have any, that's okay. You can learn it. If I got really excited about historical homes or high-rise condos and didn't really know anything about it, I could go out and learn as much as I needed to learn to become an expert. It might take a little longer, right? So I would say if an agent is newer to the business and they're not yet sure like where they gravitate, test drive a few things, right? Like go check out all of the historic listings in your area, or go check out the high rise condos and ask yourself, gosh, does this get me excited? Am I enthusiastic about this? And if so, just keep learning about those particular types of properties or people.
Yeah, and I think, that's the key, right? And that's kind of goes into my second part of this is after we do kind of figure out what our specialty is, what we want to focus on, what steps should we be taking to actually achieve that level of specificity, of expertise? How can we really make sure that, hey, I want to do this, but now let me prove that I am the expert in this? How do we go about doing that?
Well, I'll give you an example of luxury properties, right? A lot of people will go out and they'll get a designation either in luxury or even with seniors. And they think that having those letters after their name is what gives them the expertise and or the 2-day class that they took or whatever happens to be that they got their credentials. And the consumer really can see beyond that. They're smarter than that. And so I would say that that's not a bad start, right? Take a class, but that's just the beginning. That should be like the foundational piece. And then from there, I am a big fan of focus groups. And not everybody knows what focus groups are, but think of a focus group as basically a gathering of people, all with similar interests, similar experiences. And I want to know what their experience was or is. So let's say I'll use luxury again as an example. So if you're wanting to be an expert in luxury, but you don't have that, like, you don't feel like you really have that experience yet, you might get together with a group of people that live in an area that is considered a luxury home area, offer to buy dinner, offer to pay for lunch or something, and ask them, what does it mean to live here? What is this about? Like, what does this mean to you? And find out, because it's about the people more than it is the property, really. And you have to be able to connect with the people. So focus groups are a great way. Social gatherings are a great way. Open houses are a great way. I'll tell you, when I first started focusing on working with older adults, I went out and I found out everything I could learn about every senior living community in our market. Not for the purpose of getting business, but for the purpose of knowing that industry and understanding it. And then I went out and learned as much as I could learn about the people who lived there. So I did focus groups. So same thing with any area, whether it's here in Oklahoma and in the Midwest and the middle part of the country, a lot of people have farms and ranches. They can specialize in farms and ranch and acreage. And if you grew up on a farm or a ranch or an acreage, that's probably pretty natural to you. But if you didn't, you're going to do a lot of driving and you may even want to buy a pickup truck, right? You need to fit in. That's the other thing. You got to be able to fit in. And there are some niches that I can tell you that I would just know that be a good fit for. It's just not authentic to me. No matter how much I learned or studied, it wouldn't make sense. So it also has to be something that you kind of live your brand,
Yeah, I think having that right fit, is super important. And I think that goes back to what you were saying about the consumer, like they are going to be able to sniff that out. They're going to be able to see right through that if they're working with somebody who isn't, walking the walk in, talking the talk. They're educated enough these days to be able to say like, hey, I don't buy that you're the expert of all of this and you don't even live in my neighborhood or, just something like that, just for an example.
Yeah.
Like you said, the consumers are smart and they're going to be able to tell that for sure.
So a great example of that, I felt like such a poser one time. I was talking with someone, and now mind you, I hadn't lived in Florida at this point, but I was coaching people around the country on working with seniors, and I had an agent ask me about the villages in Florida. And I thought, villages in Florida, I don't know if I know what that is. And they were surprised that I didn't know. So, of course, after that conversation, I Googled it and I went, oh my gosh, this is like the largest retirement area in all of Florida. How did I not know this? Right? I have to know these things. So I made this like what I consider mistake in not understanding the scope of retirement in the US. Now that's a big market, right? And so I'm like, okay, so if you're going to be an expert in your hometown in a certain area, school system, whatever it is, and someone asks you a question, you should be able to answer that question. And if you can't answer that question, a very like what would be considered common knowledge question, then they're going to go, oh, are you really an expert? Like, it just, you have to dig in. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen overnight, right? It happens over time, but you have to start somewhere. So I don't want to mislead people to think that the first day you say I'm an expert, you have to know every single thing, but you better be committed to learning it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that knowledge gathering, I think, is so important, right? Like always be learning, always be researching the area, being in the area, going to coffee shops and wherever, whatever you're trying to get into, study all of that and learn as much about it as you can so that you really are becoming that expert and can answer any question that your clients may have.
Well, and Allison, I think too, MLS really helps with that too, right? So if you're going to focus your attention in, say, a geographic area or a type of property, maybe historic homes or condos, whatever it might be, you set up a hot sheet for that. And you should every single day know everything that's going on the market in that category, everything that's gone pending, every price change, everything about that market. When someone asks you a question, say, oh, Nikki, you're an expert in this. Do you know about this? If I don't know the answer, I immediately say, I don't know the answer to that, but I need to know more because I'm immediately going to go research it. So what can you tell me? And then they tell me what they know. And I say, great, I'm going to go check that out. I immediately go check that out, call them up and say, okay, I am so grateful. Like you saved me because this was something I needed to know about and I was unaware. So thank you for sharing that. And here's what I learned about it. And then I share that information with them. And so then what happens is once you are known as an expert, then the people in your sphere begin to help you develop that knowledge. So now we actually have people call us and say, hey, Nikki, did you know there's a new retirement community being built in our area? And I'll say, no, tell me about it. Where is it? And they tell me the address and I'll say, okay, great. We're going to go run by it and see what we can learn. And then we call them back to tell them because they don't know what it is either. They just see the sign that says retirement community being built, right? And it becomes a collaboration with your people, with your tribe. And they want to see you succeed and they see you as the expert. So then when they refer you, that's a beautiful thing because they'll call a friend and the friend will say, I'm going to buy a house. Where are you going to buy a house? Oh, here's the area. Oh, you need to talk to this person. They are the expert. And that is a solid referral. That's not a maybe referral.
Yeah, that's where the magic happens, right? That's where like, okay, all coming together. And I love that too. That's about like, building up your community, showing that you are a staple, in whatever arena you choose to play in. And that could really help solidify you and your reputation as that go-to person. So I think, we've been able to find our niche. We've been able to figure out what we want to focus on, what steps we're taking to really become that specialist and that expert in that area, a ton of knowledge. Then what's next? What's the best way to share this specialty with consumers? And I know you mentioned referrals, and that is a fantastic way to get that. But as far as a branding business perspective, how should we be sharing this? What should that look like as far as getting the word out that we are the expert in that area?
Yeah, that's wonderful. So to be congruent, right, your marketing message, your social media message, your website, all of your branding needs to be consistent. And this is where people get a little nervous, right? They're like, oh my gosh, if I put myself out there as an expert in this, then I may not get business over here. And I get that a lot from people. And so it's scary at first. I'm not going to say it's not, but it is so important that you go all in and really embrace your brand and embrace your marketing message and know that you may miss some opportunities, but it would be rare, I would say, for you to miss an opportunity because if they see, I liken it to the medical field. So if I'm on a ski trip and I break my leg and it needs to be reset, there are any number of physicians or doctors that are going to be on the slope that can do that. But if I'm going to have heart surgery, I don't want the podiatrist setting my leg to give me heart surgery, right? I don't want I want the specialist. But if I'm in a pinch and I have a crisis or somebody tells me this doctor can write me a prescription for an antibiotic, I'm cool with that, right? That's called general medicine. Anybody can do that. And so for real estate, if you have somebody that needs to buy or sell a house and it's pretty much what you would consider general real estate, you're not going to lose any of that business because you're an expert. Now, if you're an expert in luxury and I'm an expert in seniors, I'm probably going to get the senior business. But let's say it's luxury senior business. Let's say it's an older adult who owns a luxury property. All bets are off. It could be either one of us, right? Depending on what's important. So branding is really key. And Allison, I think when agents think of branding, my experience is they often think of their colors, their logo, their website, design elements, which is all fun and creative and all that. But it's really more about messaging, right? It's more about the words you use, the people, and speaking their language. So learn the lingo, know the buzzwords, if you will, for that niche and use the language correctly. One of my biggest pet peeves in working with senior adults is agents who call retirement communities facilities. We call that the F word in the industry. Do not use the F word. And agents who use the F word, we know are not experts in working with older adults because you would never, ever, ever use that word. It's always community. And so it's kind of my differentiator. Like, okay, I know you're really an expert or you're not if you use that word. So the people in the industry also know that. And so if I'm going to specialize in luxury, I have a lot of work to do because I don't know all of the fancy places to go. I don't know all of the beautiful amenities that go into luxury properties. I would have a lot of work to do. Farms and ranch, same thing. If you look at a horse ranch, you need to be able to identify the pieces and be able to speak to them correctly, right? And not just guess at what is that equipment and things like that. So I think your messaging is also about what's important to those people. So you're doing this podcast today because you know that you know your audience and you know what their needs are and what's important to them. And so you said, hey, let's do these topics. When agents are posting on their blog and they do these really generic posts about everything under the sun, then they're a generalist. But if you're a specialist, your blog needs to be 90% stuff related to your specialty, right? And that's part of your messaging.
Absolutely. That's super smart. And I think it goes back to what we were saying about the consumer. When you just mentioned, hey, I know this. If someone uses this word in my industry, they're not in with what's going on. And I think that's the same thing that, when you live and breathe in this space, people are going to be able to tell and they're looking for those types of things, and that can really help you stand out or be something that goes against you for a specific client or consumer. I think absolutely that's so true. Best words of advice or biggest lesson you've learned, or how should we as realtors really take this and kind of run with it? What would you say? Best bit of advice or what you've learned, biggest lesson?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Well, one would be pick one. Don't try to be an expert in three things because you're back to being a generalist. So that would be my biggest one. You can't be an expert in everything. I would say do the work. That would be the other thing. Pick your specialty, take a class, go online, model what other people are doing, see what other agents are doing, see what people not in real estate are doing in that field. Do the homework, go out and do the research, read, listen to podcasts, do all the things you need to do to become the expert. Don't assume. And this is probably the biggest and this is unfortunate because this is an industry problem. But 2 days in a class does not make you an expert. I don't care whose class it is, my class, anybody's class. It gives you a foundation to start with. Then you have to build on that foundation. So just because you have letters on your business card does not make you an expert. Go the extra mile and truly become somebody that knows their stuff.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Great bits of advice, a great roadmap that you've just laid out for us in order to make this a part of our business strategy and just something so smart to do. I think in today's climate, knowing everything, what the industry changes have done and where we stand as realtors today, so important to be able to prove that value and be doing everything we can to provide that high quality service to our clients. So, Nikki, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing this wonderful knowledge, and congratulations on an amazing career and really being the expert in finding your expertise.
Yeah, I love it. I love coaching agents on finding their expertise because once they do, it's so much more fun in this business. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all of our listeners, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Real View. That wraps up today's episode. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at ohiorealtors.org/therealview and on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Have questions, comments, or suggestions? We want to hear from you. Email us at podcast@ohiorealtors.org. We'll see you next time.